This is Alternator Plus here, and I'm going to show you how to rebuild your Ford 6G alternators. They generally come in two different sizes. You have your standard frame and your large frame. This one here today is a standard frame, set up generally to fit on normal 7.3 diesel 6.0s. There are many different frames and styles of these. They all come apart and go back together the same, and majority of the components are interchangeable, so this video should be able to cover all of them. Now, when coming apart, you have these 3 5/16 bolts. Now, this back cap is held on by the bearing, so you will have to hammer it off. You can take a screwdriver here and pop off this little cover. You can see the bearing there and the tolerance ring that holds it on. You don't want to hit it hard enough to damage the aluminum, but these are sometimes on here pretty tough. There it goes. Now, when coming off, there's generally a little lip on the bottom of this that holds it onto the bearing, and it generally will break it off when coming apart, but as long as the inside here isn't cracked in half, you should be able to reuse the tolerance ring. Now then, we have the inside of the alternator. We can go ahead and remove the little battery post insulator. Depending on what model of alternator you have, some of them will generally have a post. In order to take that off, you'll just remove this plastic cover and there'll be a little nut here and pop that off. Next, we'll go ahead and take off the regulator and inspect it. You'll have 3 T20 Torx bolts here. And you want to be careful taking these off and on, as it's threaded into aluminum, a very thin piece of it, and they can get stripped out very easily. So I just only get them snug tight when going back together. Now then, let's slide this off here. This is what your brushes should look like when they're new. If they are worn past this little circle for when loading, about halfway down, that's barely acceptable. Anything lower than that, then you will need the brushes or regulator replaced. Things to look out for: you want to inspect the rotor to make sure it is nice and smooth. If you have grooves and cuts, any type of indentions into the rotor, you're going to want to put a new slip ring over it. You don't want to have to reuse it because it will overly wear the brushes and they won't last long. Next, we have the rectifier. It will have 8 diodes. In order to check these, you will need a analog multimeter. Grab that real quick. You can visually inspect each one of these solder points for where the diodes go in and see if they're broken. If it looks like it's flared out on any one of these, then you're going to want to replace the rectifier. I'll have one here for an example. This here is a bad one. I don't know if it'll show up, but you can see where the solder's blown out and it's mushroomed out. That's a clear indicator that the rectifier is bad. It will need to be replaced. In order to do so, you will unsolder these stator leads right here. They're generally pretty tough coming out. If you need to, you can go ahead and pull the stator out and use a torch and just melt these out and take a pair of pliers and pull them, as long as you don't damage the stator wires. Getting this out can be tough, as it is generally very tight press fitted in. A good way to get it out, I found, is just take a torch and slightly heat it up, and sometimes they'll just slide right out. If not, you'll have to hammer around to try to slowly get this thing out. Go ahead and do that real quick. This will not damage the alternator as long as you keep the flame away from the winding. starting to budge. There she goes. We'll set that to the side. Now work on our pulley. To get this off, you will need an impact gun of somewhere at least around 120 foot-pounds or more. Some of these can be on there extremely tight. You will not get this off with a hand wrench. I've seen these come in extremely damaged with people trying to use pry bars and a socket wrench trying to get this off. You will not get it loose. So I have our 1/2 inch impact gun here. It will be a 15/16 socket. We're going to grab a hold of the pulley. There it goes. If this pulley is on there, rust it in, hit it with some type of blaster, rust eater or anything to get in there and to get it out, and you want to be careful slowly prying these out. Like, this is one of the original pulleys. We refer to them as a tin can pulley, as it's just really thin, cheap, pressed steel, and they're really easy to bend if you're putting pry bars behind it trying to pop it off, so you want to be really careful with that. If you have a solid steel milled pulley, then it's not something you have to worry about. Next thing you want to do is probably shoot some PB Blast or WD-40 in there if it's rusted out around the bearing, because it'll be pretty stubborn to get out. You do not want to hit on this trying to knock it out. It can damage the threads very easily, and if that bends or damages the threads, you probably won't be able to get the nut back on there. Easy trick I found is to screw this nut on there. This one's already loose. And put it down off around the sides of the housing, and you can get a rubber mallet and try to hammer down on it, or apply heat if necessary. But this is a new bearing, clean rotor, so it will go ahead and just slide right out. So to the side, we'll have 3 more little bolts here. They'll be 5/16 as well. Go ahead and remove our bearing retainer. And our bearings are going to be in there. Sometimes they'll just fall right out. If they're in there, you want to be careful hammering on it not to crack the aluminum. If you got something to stick behind here for backup, I'd go ahead and use that. Use a punch. Something fitting on the bearing, but this one should just gently tap right out because it is new and unrusted. And that is your basic breakdown of your 6G alternators. Besides pulling off this back bearing, if you have a pulley puller or bearing puller, you want to use that on this. If you don't, the next thing you could try doing is putting this in a vise. You want to be really careful with it. If you have printer paper, something like that, you can fold up a couple sheets to wrap around it, keep it from getting damaged. This is just slightly in there, not enough to hurt it. You can try using some pry bars to get underneath it to slowly pull it off. It might be a difficult task, but it could be doable. If your slip ring is damaged on this, with grooves cut in it, and you're able to find a slip ring to put on, it's not too hard of a job to do. As you can see, it has these metal that wraps around here, and you want to use a Dremel tool with a small blade to cut this out, and then a pair of cutters, and you can go ahead and snap each side of it, and has little slots in here. Let's see if it shows up, where you can fit some pry bars and pop this thing out. If you don't have the bearing off already, you can go ahead and pull and try to pop both of these off in one go. And putting a new one on, it presses in just as easy, just goes down. And the ones we use, over here, placements will look like this. They have a lot thinner wire. These are welded on from the factory. Let's see if we'll show it. And it's a solid steel bar that comes out that's welded in. Most people aren't going to have the tools in order to do that, so this makes it a lot easier. These will press down, bend these out, and you'll wrap this little end piece around the post and solder it down. there's your part number, where you can find these. I'll go ahead and list all the parts that you can get in the description. That way it can make finding stuff for this a lot easier for you. Alrighty. Now going back together, you'll take your new bearings. These will use standard 6303 bearings, or the industry number will be 6303 2RS. Sometimes when going back in, if you just press, they'll just pop right in. If not, you'll have to press these in. If you don't have a press or anything to work with, you can try using a punch to gently tap this down with, but make sure not to get the bearing crooked. It could easily get wedged in there and split the aluminum housing. Go ahead and start with that. Make this as simple as possible, like if you don't have enough tools necessary. Normally we'd use a press to punch these in, but we'll imitate it just in case. Being stubborn. Generally, I pop in a lot easier. Go ahead and put on our bearing retainer. Now when putting these in, this also steel screw threads into aluminum. It's easy to strip these out, or they're generally really bad about being Loctited in from other rebuilders, and they're easy to break and strip these off. If that happens, it's no big deal. You can go and just leave 2 screws in, as long as this is pushed down out of the way, not rubbing on the rotor. Worst case scenario, you can leave this out and put some type of really strong super glue around the bearing and then press it in, and it will hold itself. Go ahead and pull this bearing off so I can show you. Once you pull this bearing off, you do not want to press your new one on. It will be the last thing that you will do when putting this alternator together. Still in there a little bit. Use a little sock to help push it out. Now then, take your front half, slide the rotor in, put the pulley back on. You'll want to torque this down to at least anywhere from 70 to 80 or more foot-pounds. I wouldn't go anything over 120 to not strip out the threads, but it will have to be very tight. Go ahead and grab a hold of the pulley and torque her down. Now, if you have slight burrs on these, or if it's extremely dirty, do not fret. You can get a piece of sandpaper, something really low grit, around 200, 300, wrap it around here, and I found a very easy way to smooth these out. Got 220 grit, you can put it on here. And it'll smooth it out just like new. Alrighty. Set that off to the side. Now then, for our diodes, you will need a digital multimeter. Set to resistances, have it on times 10. Go ahead and make sure it's set. You want to adjust it all the way to the 0 with them touching together. You're going to go positive to the positive post, and then take the negative one and stick it on each stator terminal, and it should read about a little over halfway. If it does, then that's good. If it reads all the way over like this, then you know that diode is bad, or if it does not read at all. This isn't a foolproof way to test it, as sometimes they'll read good and these here will be still burnt out, and you do not want to reuse it. You still want to replace the rectifier even though it tests good. And then you'll test the negative side, negative here, and touch, and it should read nothing. If you get a reading on any one of these this way, any one of the diodes or posts, then you know that you have a bad diode and you want to replace the rectifier. Then you'll go to the ground, you'll stick the ground here on the frame, then go to here and it'll read halfway again. You want to do that both ways, all the way across on each one. When buying replacement rectifiers, I recommend getting one with a drop-down Y stator style terminal. It'll look like this. You have these little parts that stick down there where you're able to shove the wires in through, clamp them down, solder them, and good to go. This is one with avalanche diodes, which I recommend getting, as they're a lot better to hold up for wear and tear and strenuous uses. Now then, going back together, this thing does not matter which way you go back together, and it'll clock in any 3 positions, so it might be best, if you're not 100% sure how you come apart, to mark it beforehand. Get a punch marker or something to mark the stator and the back plate. That way you know how it goes back together. This one will go this way. Let me mark clock straight up. It should gently slide back in. If it doesn't, you can try reheating the housing to slide it back in if it wants to be tough. If not, get your back plate with a rubber hammer and gently tap it in, or once you get your bolt started, you can slowly start working it in. Pop this back off. But you don't want to have to hammer on this and get it stuck. It can easily crack and break this if it's too much pressure going up or down. We'll go back with the regulator. There are many different styles of regulators on these alternators, so it's something you'll have to keep an eye out for. Whichever one you take out of your alternator, you want to make sure you go back with. There are grays like these. These are your standard ones you'll find on your diesel trucks. It'll be gray and gray. It'll be gray and gray. Next, you'll have your PCM style. I don't have one here, but I do have the replacement with me. There will be a white and black cover. This one's black, but it'll generally be white and blue. But this one's black and blue. It's just an aftermarket one I had laying around. If you have either one of those two, this one here will take its place. It is a white and gray. You do not want to mix these two up on here. You cannot use a white and blue to take the place of a white and black, or a white and black to take the place of a white and blue. They have different load response times that will mess with the car's computer, since these are computer regulated style regulators. So if you have one of those, I recommend just getting one of these so you don't have to mix things up. This replaces either one of those. It has both computer codes in it. Next one you'll generally run into is your white and orange. It is similar to the white and gray with the way it works. Or not white and gray, sorry, gray and gray. But it has a very long load response time, and you cannot interchange these two. So if you have one of these, you will want to go back with that. And last but not least is your gray and green. This is the newer style they made to replace these. If your vehicle has one of these on it from factory, you'll want to go back with this. You don't want to replace the newer styles with the original gray and gray. But we have seen a lot of issues with these on the older vehicles, them using to replace, even though they said they can replace these. We've seen these generally fail early on the older models, so I'd recommend sticking with these if you have an original one that's gray and gray, or buying one of these right here. This one is a US made replacement. There's a part number on that. It will replace both the gray and gray and the gray and green. These are heavy duty replacement ones. It'll be black and green. And these generally hold up very well. We haven't had any issues out of them. Now then, we're going to go ahead and replace our slip ring on here. They're generally very stubborn to take out. Sometimes I may have to use a screwdriver with a hammer to slowly tap it out. Sorry, not slip ring, your bearing tolerance ring. They'll have 3 little notches here on the sides. You want to match them up with the notches cut into the back housing, and they'll just slide right in. If yours doesn't go right in, you can just put it down with a mallet and just gently tap her down. Now then, take her insulator cover, stick her on. Going back in with your new regulator. I don't recommend reusing these regulators. Most of the remans will reuse these regulators, and they'll just solder brushes in. We consider these a wear item. This microchip getting hot and cold, hot and cold, hot and cold, just like with any other computer or sensor, it will go bad over time. I recommend just replacing the whole brush holder regulator combo, not even messing with it. 90% of the alternators we see come in of these are remans from the big green and orange stores I'm talking about, and they nearly 90% of the time reuse these, and they'll last a week, a month. They'll test good, but under driving conditions with the motor getting hot and cold, they fail and break down. I have an example of that right here, actually. Here's one. This is a regulator off of a new reman. You can see the brushes have no wear on it, but they drilled out the back of this and resoldered brushes in and just used some cheap Bondo or silicone to fill the back of it. A regular one will have a normal rubber cap on it. Now when you get these, they'll have a little pin that generally holds them in. If not, you can get you a paper clip, anything like that, and load the brushes. Well, these ain't too hard. You can just generally hold your finger and just drop them in, as long as you don't get the brushes caught or broken on anything. back in with the 3 torque screws. I recommend only hand tightening these, just getting them nice and snug. As I mentioned earlier, these are very easily to strip out. They thread in through a very short piece of aluminum, and you don't want to get them cross-threaded, because if they do strip out, then your 2 main connections here from your B plus and your stator terminal is what works the regulator. This last one over here is generally for a ground, but there's no hookup to it. So if this one strips out, you can just put some Loctite glue in there to help hold it, and you won't be too hurt on that. Just mainly these 2 you want to watch out for. You don't want them stripped, or it could affect the regulator. And if that happens, then you can try getting some self-threading screws to put in here to help hold it down, or you may just end up having to replace the whole rectifier. Nice and snug. Once that's done, you'll go ahead and pull your pin. You want to make sure not to forget this, because if you leave a metal pin in there, some of them will come with a plastic one, but if you have a metal one, you leave it in, hook battery just here, you'll instantly blow your regulator. Now then, take your back cap. She'll just press on there. As I mentioned before, with that little lip that's in there, the reason why you want to wait putting that bearing on last is because that little lip, if you try putting it on, it will generally crack and break this thing. And you don't want to do that. Get her tightened down. And this tallest ring, if it's ever broken or cracked along the sides, that can allow the bearing to expand and move around. And if this ever blows out, then there's nothing holding the bearing steady. Your alternator is going to wobble, it's going to short out, and it's going to basically destroy itself. Alrighty, grab a new bearing. Here we go. These will be a B10 51D, or another replacement will just be a B10 50D, but either one of those will work. Those are the standard industry numbers. And if you don't have a press to push this in, you can just use what we generally use as a brass punch and slowly tap it in. You want to hammer it all the way down to where it's flush with the end of the rotor there. And go ahead and put your cover back on. If you lose or break this, it's not necessarily needed. It's just a little inspection cover. Help keep water and stuff off the bearing. It'll work without it. And there you go. That's it. Other stuff to look out for. We're going back together with this. Since this is a tri-bolt frame here, with the way this thing goes together, it's very easy to get this thing lopsided. You want to make sure that the stator and everything's all pushed down. If it's wanting to lock up and you go back together, you want to get a hand tool. You want to slowly loosen these up and tighten them. Get them around all the same tightness until you get it fit back to where it'll turn normally. If you hear what sounds like paper hitting around, that's not something you have to worry about. That's just some of the paper inside the stator coming loose, and it'll eventually just wear itself off. It won't hurt nothing. You can just run the alternator as is. Alrighty. Now when going back and testing these, you want to put these on your vehicle to test them. Most people aren't going to have the equipment to test these. Most auto parts stores won't have the equipment to test ones with these PCM regulators, so excuse me. So when putting these back on, you want to test them generally on the vehicle only under a load. Alright. Okay, to get my notes here for a second. Other things to look out for, some of the remans I see that come in generally have wrong parts installed back in them. They'll have wrong regulators, wrong stator windings. You'll run into two different styles. There is a single lead. There's just a single wire coming out of the stator, and then a double lead or dual lead. There'll be two wires coming out. Whichever one you have, you generally want to go back with. You will never see one of these on a truck. These will generally only be used on small applications, cars, sedans. They'll come off of Ford Focus, the Ford Escapes, but you'll never see these on a truck. But I've seen mainly the remans in Mexico will come, they'll try sticking these on there trying to make them work, and they will not hold up on a truck. It will not keep up with the power that they need. So it's something to look out for. If they sell you one, you can look to these cracks here before you're getting one, and there's not a double lead and you have a truck, that's something I wouldn't take the alternator. I'd have them give you another one. Another thing to look out for, it's best to rebuild your own stuff, is a lot of these places will charge you top dollar and you're not getting much for your unit. Quick little example here, these two Mexico remans from the big green and orange stores. You're looking over $200 for your remans, and if you read the fine print, you're only guaranteed brushes and bearings new. That's it. And I've seen them come in all the time. They'll try resoldering these in, making them work, and they won't last. They'll blow out. They'll have reused regulators. They'll last about a week, a month, and blow out. We end up having to fix them all the time. But adding the parts up, not even 50 cents per brush. They are going to have the cheapest Chinese bearings that they can buy that they're going to stick in them. Sometimes I've run into, they'll even reuse the original bearings and not even put new ones in there. But you're being greatly ripped off. You're talking not even $5 in parts that they're putting in. So they polish them up, make them look nice and pretty, but you're pretty much getting scammed on a lot of these rebuilds that you're getting. So if they don't care if you bring the thing back 10 times, they're still making profit on you. Now, other stuff to do when putting this back on, you want to make sure your battery's fully charged. You do not want to stick this on with a dead or bad battery. That's one good way to quickly destroy your alternator. Your alternator is only meant to maintain your battery and run the equipment that's on the vehicle. So if you're adding a lot of aftermarket accessory stuff, this may not keep up with it, and you want to look at getting a higher amp upgrade. This is another common mount you'll see that generally be on the 5.4 Tritons and stuff. It'll be a middle mount here. All the teardown and stuff will be the same on it. But it will greatly reduce the life of the alternator, at least if you try doing that. That's generally every other day I'll run into this problem where people won't take the proper precautions. They'll stick their alternator on, have dirty terminals and cables or plumb dead battery, put it in, put a jumper on it, crank it, and the alternator's done melted and fried in 30 minutes. So these new regulators do require a break-in period. So I wouldn't run much equipment. Take it easy, drive the thing normal for a couple days, let the thing go through a couple heating, cooling cycles if your engine getting hot and cold. If not, it could damage the regulator, could cause the regulator to burn out early, could cause the alternator to overstress itself and burn out one of the diodes. Another thing to look out for is these are not compatible with marine or deep cell batteries, so you not want to stick them on your vehicle. On one of these newer cars, especially with one of these, it will trick the regulator in thinking the battery's constantly dead, and it'll be working overtime 24/7 trying to maintain it when the battery's already full, and it'll slowly work its way and burn itself out. Or at the very least, it will greatly reduce the life of the alternator. I've seen them burn these up in little as 30 minutes. So I'll try to list all the parts down in the description. If there's any questions and stuff, you can leave them for me. I'll try to answer them whenever I can. But that's how you go through your 6G alternators, as simply as possible with tools you have at home. So y'all have a good one.